Hi, it's Amy Shaw here. What I want to talk about today is demonic possession, entity attachment, evil, basically spiritual warfare. The reason that this is really on my mind lately is a couple reasons. First of all, in the last 4 to 6 weeks, I've been contacted at least half a dozen times by people who are specifically stating that they have some type of entity attachment, a malevolent spirit that is unpleasant. They're suffering, they don't want it anymore, and they are asking me for help in getting rid of it, extracting it, and what have you. So with the increase of people coming to me for this type of work, and also the school I'm enrolled in, we've been talking a lot about a kind of a cosmology of evil and of, spiritual warrior, of course, is one of the facets for the shamanic archetype. It's something that I'm sure the more that I talk about this, the more people I'm going to have attracted to me, asking me to do this type of work for them. I'm okay with that. But for myself, as I've shared in many, many previous videos, I came out of Christianity. I came to Christianity in my early 20s, so I didn't grow up my whole life with this real firm identity as a Christian. But even still, I spent a good part of my life in the Protestant church. And while I'm the type of person that was not a pew warmer, I didn't just sit there and accept everything that the talking head up at the pew was saying was the truth. I really went out and investigated it for myself. Because of that, I read a lot of books. As you can see, I often record videos in my library. That book, the shelf there in the corner, the real tall one, is just full of Bible study and Christian theology type of books. So I really dug in, and I felt like at the time I had a really good understanding of Satan and demon possession. And now a lot of people will criticize and say, what's book knowledge? What's book knowledge, especially when you're doing spiritual work? And I would wholeheartedly agree that we learn far more from a direct experience. But there has to be a context for that. And that comes from our belief system and our culture and how we sort of make sense of our direct experience. Now, the interesting thing about the shamanic path is that to be hollow bone, to do the spirit work, you do have to have moments where you let go of pretty much everything that you believe, or hold it so loosely that when new information is coming to you, you're open to allow it to challenge what you believe. But by the same token, you can't be like so open that, everything goes. There has to be some kind of context for what you believe and what you practice and why you practice it. So this concept of evil's just really been coming up a lot, and trying to understand it outside of a Christian context. When I came out of Christianity and I found myself on a shamanic path, I found myself surrounded by New Age people, which in itself is not a bad thing. But I noticed right away that one of the main things, there are several things about New Age philosophy that I don't really resonate with. One of the things that I really don't resonate with is the idea of non-duality. So I hear that a lot. Like anytime you start talking about evil, or quote unquote good versus bad, or light versus dark, you'll have people come out of the woodwork and they'll start saying, oh, that's dualistic, that's a duality, it's a limited way of thinking, it's us versus them. True, I agree, that's true. I think in the much higher realms than our 3D ordinary reality that we live in as human beings here on this earth, there may exist a place of non-duality. There may exist a place of infinite love. But here on this earth, right now, today, in our human bodies, we experience the truth of malevolent spirits. And so if you're not going to accept that and work with that, in a sense, there's no point of really even being in a shamanic practice. Because anybody that comes to you, you're just going to say, oh, it's just your reality, it's you made it up, just uncreate that. Or you're going to approach them in a sense of saying, oh, those aren't malevolent entities. There's no such thing. They're your teachers. Just, learn from them and go away. There has to be, an acknowledgement of the pain and suffering and how that manifests through other human beings, and some sort of offering to help relieve that in some way. So I'm trying to wrap my head around that in a way that's not decidedly churchy and biblical and Christian theology, but by the same token is not so new age that I'm just saying, oh, everything goes and it's all love and everything's wonderful, because that really isn't reality. It doesn't line up with my direct experience, and it doesn't give me something solid to work with when people come to me and they say, help, I have an entity attachment. Another part of that is that being in shamanic practice, if you come to the table with non-belief, then ultimately what that means is that if that client's telling you, I have a demonic attachment, or I have an entity attachment, or I have something that's attacking me, who is it for me to say, oh no, that's not true. That's just your reality, but it's really not the reality. It's not true. And who am I to talk them out of that? They're having a legitimate experience. And so I have to honor that and stay within their framework of their belief as much as possible as I'm assisting them. Now, the thing of it is that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm not taking some authority or using my skill set to discern what's really going on. And I say that because out of the many people that have contacted me recently asking for this type of work, I would say the majority of them actually, in my assessment of it, don't even have an entity attachment. What can happen is that people, because of their own energy imbalances, with their emotional state and their shadow psyche, they can project that out into the reals, and it manifests in a way that it can be experienced by the person as a disembodied spirit. It's not recognizable to them. It comes from such a deep part of themselves that it's not even recognizable as them, and it feels disembodied. And so they can easily mistake this for this malevolent entity, or if the person has even a tiny inkling of telekinesis, they can actually manifest it in the physical. So we would call this poltergeist, and this is where you actually see doors opening and shutting, and it appears that a spirit is doing this. I'm not saying that this is incredibly common. What I'm saying is that when a poltergeist situation is occurring, it's incredibly common for the individual to not recognize it for what it is and to seek help thinking that it's a spirit, it's a haunting, it's an entity, it's a ghost, it's something that I don't want that's scaring me. So that is probably a lot more common than people would think. So sometimes people come and that's what they want, just do an extraction, and that's not really the appropriate thing to do. Sometimes it requires a much sort of longer road of processing through the shadow material, the emotional realm, doing the alchemy that's needed to clear that out of the person's life, which is a form of extraction. But sometimes it does require a lot more of an alchemical process than the traditional shamanic extraction. I want to talk really quick about why I think it's really important to talk about this, to understand it, to have a sort of theology, if you will, of evil. Because we do live in times, whether you believe we're living in duality or not, the fact of it is we are living in times where we cannot afford to be neutral. The moment that you say, oh, duality doesn't exist and I'm neutral, and is the moment that you actually fall into darkness. But the point that I'm making here is that we definitely don't go down into the underworld without bringing a light with us. That's the natural occurring contrast of our experience in these 3D human bodies, the light and the dark. And when you deny the reality of the darkness existing, you're in effect giving away to it. You're sort of laying down and accepting it for what it is. Now, I'm not saying that, and this is the difference in Christianity, is that in my experience as a Christian and the time that I spent in the church, Christianity itself sort of put a value judgment, and so it was a very black and white, and it was very, this is of the devil, this is of God, this is hell, this is heaven. Everything was put in a context of very black and white, and so there was actually eternal value judgments that were placed on these things. So, for example, Judas betrayed Jesus, and because the Bible says that Satan entered him, which is what allowed him to carry out the betrayal, it's a very common Christian teaching that Judas went to hell. He went out and committed suicide. The Bible's clear about that. And then his soul went to hell because he was evil. He was of the devil. And that's where people who are evil and of the devil go. Now, I'm not suggesting that we do that. I think if we step out of that value judgment and refrain from these sort of long-term eternal judgments on the state of a spirit's, positioning or human beings' positioning, and just call a spade a spade. That's all I'm saying. Call a spade a spade. If something is evil and malevolent, it's evil and malevolent. It doesn't mean that it's bound to hell eternally. It just means at this point in time, this is the state, and it's calling the spade the spade. We do live in this time of constant spiritual antagonism from the dark forces, malevolent forces, this overarching satanic force, if you want to call it, that seeks to cannibalize, vampirize, basically kill, destroy, harm human beings. And we have to acknowledge that. Not acknowledging it is falling victim to it, and also potentially allowing yourself to become an operant of it through the shadow side of not recognizing it for what it is. I want to read, I recently, because this is coming up so much for me lately, I recently ordered a book that's been on my wish list for a really, really long time, and it came a few days ago. It's called Dispelling Wetiko, Breaking the Curse of Evil. It is by Paul Levy, and I'm not too far into the book, but it's really interesting. I'm familiar enough with Wetiko that I'm really excited to be reading about it. I just want to read a quote really quick that is actually from Carl Jung. So here I'm going to read a little bit of Paul's words and then go into the quote by Jung. So Paul says of Carl Jung, he was continually pointing at Wetiko malignant egophrenia when he would write about, quote unquote, the germ of psychological evil. He emphasized the importance of developing a container, a word which revealingly has multiple meanings, to include hold together, have capacity for, control, restrain, and limit, in which to catch such troublesome and malevolent spirits. Jung writes, therefore, if anything is wrong, take it out of its place and put it in the vessel that is between your neighbor and yourself. For love of mankind, create a vessel into which you can catch all that damned poison. For it must be somewhere. It is always somewhere. And not to catch it, to say that it doesn't exist, gives the best chance of any germ. So I think what that quote is actually saying is that we have to acknowledge the truth of evil. Not only how it causes human suffering, but our own capacity to manifest it. One of the things I also want to say is that through my shamanic studies, I've kind of been taught to not call these entities, and let me just be clear. Shamanic extraction can include many, many different things. It can include an emotional sort of extraction. It can include literal physical manifestation of disease. And actually going back to what I was talking about, how individuals oftentimes project out of their shadow or their emotional self into their space, and then they think that that's an entity, even if it's not fully manifested as a poltergeist. And how this could be, I'll give you an example. It could be someone laying in bed at night and it's dark and they just get this overwhelming fear, this like creepiness, this feeling like something's there and watching them. Sometimes that could be something there watching them, but sometimes it's just their own, their quiet and their stillness. And in that quiet and that stillness, out starts coming this stuff from the shadow saying, look at me, I want to see the light, I want you to work with me here. And that's projecting out, and that's how they're experiencing it, as if it's outside of them coming in this way, when in reality it's going the other way. So sometimes, though, how these kinds of things can actually manifest is even in physical disease. So shamanic extraction can include that. It can include the emotional embodiment, and it can include the physical disease element. I mean, it can include a literal malevolent middle world spirit or entity attachment. It can include a lot of different things. But I was taught in my shamanic studies to basically, when somebody has a spirit attachment, to look at it very neutrally, to look at it as if it's only just a middle world spirit. And sometimes middle world spirits get a little bit confused, and sometimes they try to kind of like manifest through human beings. And, sometimes they can cause alcoholism and drug addiction and, these kind of things because they're, coming through the person. And but it's a very sort of neutral approach to it. I personally have found that falls short. It's not aggressive enough in calling a spade a spade. I understand the fundamental reason why it's important to be cautious in calling something a demon, because for a lot of people, the word demon conjures up this whole notion of fear. And as soon as you say to somebody, you have a demon attachment, or they say to you, I have a demon attachment, they automatically tend to fall into being disempowered. They become fearful. They feel like they have no control over this. And so I understand why we wouldn't want to promote that or encourage that frame of mind. But by the same token, you can be in your power and not be afraid, stand your ground and be firm, and call a spade a spade. If a demon's a demon, it's a demon. So calling it a demon doesn't necessarily automatically mean that you've fallen out of your power. It might mean that for a lot of people. So discerning that is important aspect. But this is especially important because falling into sorcery is so easy to do and it's so tempting. I have so many people that come to me and they're suffering, they're in pain. I understand that. They want the magic wand. And I think to some degree there is a little bit of misnomer about shamanism that it's the quick fix. Why go through 5 years of psychotherapy when I could just go have a 30-minute soul retrieval and be done with all of that? And I would agree that the shamanic approach is powerful and it can move people in a much quicker way. But I also think that we have to be cautious in not expecting people to wave the magic wand. Because I see a lot of people that come to me and that's what they want. They just want relief, immediate relief. They just want to wave the magic wand. They want the quick fix. They want the in and out. Sometimes it's appropriate for that. I mean, sometimes I can offer, a really quick, extraction, a really quick soul retrieval, really, all in one thing, and they're good to go. And but sometimes they're on a path. They are actually on a path. And it requires a much longer sort of alchemical process to transmute that. That's another thing I wanted to say before I close. A lot of the dark magicians, dark sorcerers, they will say that it's not a good idea to show favoritism to the spirits. So they're open to all the spirits, good, bad, light, dark, benevolent, malevolent. They're open to them all. And they look down on people who call themselves light workers or white witches or all the other sort of light-bearing spiritual warrior positions to be in, they look down on that because they think that the moment that you start ignoring the dark entities, you're falling into favoritism. So they actually almost sort of pride themselves on not showing favoritism, on being open to all. Here's what I have to say about that. I think that's extremely, extremely dangerous territory for a lot of different reasons. It goes back to what I was saying about Persephone and carrying the light into the darkness. If you don't have an adequate or strong enough light, you can very, very easily be overcome. Also, there's a lot of trickster spirits, and if you're not discerning properly and you're listening to all of them and you're not putting appropriate boundaries and saying no, then you are becoming, by default, an instrument of the dark side. Now, this goes back to kind of what I was saying about not putting a value judgment. It is important to recognize that malevolent or dark entities, they are teachers. Certainly in my own path, the path of the wounded healer is a path of immense, immense suffering. Out of suffering comes compassion and empathy and wisdom and insight and all sorts of things that prepare a person for service. So we can't just throw the whole thing out and say, let's just stop all suffering ever for all time. It's all evil. Let's just banish it all over here and lock it up in a cage and be done with it. Because it is our teacher and it does serve a purpose. So we do ourselves a favor when we actually acknowledge that. But that is really, in essence, part of the transmutation process of taking that evil, taking that malevolent, taking that suffering and the pain that's been put on us as it's manifested through other human beings and even in direct experience in the spiritual realm. It's taking that experience and transmuting it into the light. That's part of the alchemical process. And so, as I said, I've certainly had plenty of malevolent teachers in my life that have kind of prodded me onto the path, that have gotten me firmer and firmer and firmer in my giftings and in my practice and in my service. So I can't just say, that it's all bad. But by the same token, I'm not going to allow myself to become an instrument of malevolent intent so that somebody else out there can learn a lesson or be on the path or become the wounded healer or, no. And so that's the danger. When you're so open to that, that's the danger, is you set yourself up and you can very easily become overwhelmed yourself into literally full possession, which isn't pretty and it doesn't feel nice, because ultimately the malevolent over spirit, whatever we want to call it, Wetiko, Satan, Lucifer, the devil, whatever we want to call that malevolent over spirit, ultimately, it does seek to destroy. It does seek to eat souls and devour people. And so being open to it and being friends with it doesn't make you not soul food. So this is why I personally am very, very cautious about this concept of non-duality and don't encourage it and I don't believe it. I think that it's sort of a way that the malevolent overspirit has infiltrated into religion, into spirituality, on both sides. I mean, being too extremely religious, too extremely rigid and dualistic, equally can lead to wars and, all sorts of human torture. We can look at radical Islam as a perfect example of that extreme radical religious ideology that devalues human life. That in essence is that malevolent satanic overspirit. And it does. It infiltrates itself in religion. It infiltrates itself in culture. All sorts of ways does it infiltrate. And definitely even in spirituality. You know, a lot of New Age people think that they're all about love and light and being all, you know, like it's a benign thing. But there's definitely a false light, and there's definitely a spiritual bypassing, and there's definitely, you know, a very subtle suggestion in non-duality to sort of just lay down and accept this darkness. So no. So I have to say no, that's definitely not my position. And while I do try to hold belief loosely and not have eternal value judgment on the state of spirits and the state of souls, even if they're expressing some type of malevolent intent, I still feel it's very important to hold your ground and call a spade a spade. So, yeah, that's it. That's just what I wanted to share today. Going back to extraction really quick before I close, I just want to say sometimes, you know, it is a clear-cut case of some entity attachment of some sort, and it can be dealt with. That's part of psychopomp work, is to just move these entities along into either higher realms or at least a different space to give some sort of relief to the person that's seeking assistance, you know. And so being of service, that's an important thing to decrease pain and suffering in the world. But once again, as I stated before, a lot of times I get contacted with people that are just convinced they have this entity attachment. That's what they're asking for, is assistance with either extraction or clearing. And I kind of do my own little assessment without undermining their fundamental beliefs, but doing a little spiritual assessment. That's what they're coming to me for, in essence. And sometimes I find that too, that it's not what they think it is. And so there has to kind of be a little bit of reframing and work on that level. So anyway, I hope that I was thorough enough in the topic. As I continue to read more and learn more and gain more experience and sort of wrap my head around a new formulating concept of evil that I'm trying to reach for, I'm sure I'm going to be talking about it more and sharing about it more. But if you have any questions in the meantime, or you want to get a hold of me, you can either drop me a comment here under the video, or look me up, and I'm around. So you can message me, email me, a lot of different ways you can contact me with questions, concerns, comments, whatever. All right, I love you guys, and have a great day.